about the history of this place. We purchased a primary residence, which is across the street, in 2018. Part of the property included this cottage. My name's Seth Kircher, and I'm sitting on the steps of our, I think, 1919 or 1920 built cottage on the west shore of Cayuga Lake in the small town of Romulus, New York. When we moved in, we were lucky that the prior owners had spent a lot of time working just on the foundation to keep the cottage kind of on its feet. Yet you walk inside and there wasn't much to it. In fact, some old furniture, a lot of dirt and grime over the course of the last probably 20-25 years. As far as we know, the prior owners really didn't have anyone inhabiting the cottage other than random weekends with family. The stories that we did hear was that nobody really wanted to stay. In some senses, the shower was kind of beyond repair and not the cleanest place to try to get clean. We started really by just gutting the place, taking all of the furniture out, most of which, when we actually got it into the sunlight, was moldy. This cottage is right next to a creek that runs directly into Cayuga Lake called Mack Creek, just to the south here, and so it's a little bit damp. Part of the reason why the cottage is, as we've been told by different contractors and those in the building trade, still standing after all of this time is primarily because of the fact that it doesn't have any insulation. The building is allowed to breathe. And when we were sort of thinking after we got the place gutted what we would do next, and originally we had plans to put shiplap on the interior and at the same time get it insulated, we decided against that completely. It's all shiplap underneath this this kind of green ugly siding, which is next on the project. When we side the house, I think we'll probably also reside the cottage. What was neat in our first stage of the kind of updating of this cottage, or at least trying to keep it in a space where it could be usable, was that as we were pulling out the furniture, as we were pulling out pots and pans and you name it, there was a precursor to linoleum, something called an art rug. You can find references to it online if you search hard and long enough. The company was Congolium, and as we lifted up after we took the furniture tax or the carpet tax off the Congolium, we lifted it up and we saw patent pending November 19, which was proof that the year that carpet was laid was sometime after 1919, about 100 years ago. So it was funny because when we got the cottage gutted like that, pulled up the rug and got all the furniture out, one of the things that we found among the treasures that were in there were a package of unused condoms. In fact, the tin is actually still on one of the rafters inside of the cottage. A package of what were called Merry Widows. And I think this was definitely before latex, if you can imagine that one. But honestly, we didn't have initially plans to go all in, in a short period of time in terms of just remodeling the cottage. But it turns out that when the pandemic hit, it just sort of became a project, something to do. And so I remember going to Lowe's or Home Depot and initially replacing what were pretty hideous chandelier type lighting. And I bought some camp lights and got up there with a ladder. And as soon as those camp lights were in, I looked at the cottage again on the interior and I said, wait a second, you know, this looks like it could turn into something. And that's where it all began. So after the camp lights got in and we realigned some of the lighting to go, you know, directly down the center of the interior of the cottage, the next thing that was on the list was experimenting with a drum sander. I'd never done that before, so part of this was crossing fingers and hoping that I wasn't actually going to ruin the beautiful spruce that luckily lined the floor without paint, anything. It was bare wood. So we got the drum sander, and after, I guess, a weekend of doing that work and some hand sanding around the edges, ended up picking up, you know, polyurethane and getting to work on the floor. This was like peeling back the layers, because first the lights and then the floor, and then as soon as we sort of saw the, you know, the beauty of the cottage and its potential, that's where things really began to pick up. In terms of creature comforts, you know, one of the, this was just kind of a riff. We got the bunk beds in, and now all of a sudden, well, we need a refrigerator. Wait a second, we're here now, and how is it that we actually extend the seasons? What about some art on the walls? What's the right direction there? And so in some ways there was, if you can believe it or not a master plan when we had started out, but it turned into, you know, sort of every time we got finished with one piece, another piece kind of filled itself in. So we called the local plumbing and heating place, ended up having them install a mini split, which really just helps us to extend the seasons. Again, no insulation, but what's nice is that we can turn on air conditioning in the summer for you know, just a nicer sleep, and extend the seasons a little bit into the autumn or early spring when we need to turn on the heat. So so that's nice as well. Having the beds in there meant that we should probably put a desk. I travel a lot for work, so I sort of had this idea that, you know, at a minimum, it should have the basics that a hotel room does. And so we did. We put a desk in there. We ended up getting a couple of foot lockers, cedar foot lockers that we could put in the space to store blankets and that sort of thing. Mary Jane was insistent on wanting to go the Hudson's Bay route for wool blankets, and true to her Canadian roots, we went with Queen's colors. chose Pendleton specifically because of the fact that they're a lighter wool, and we thought that that would be a little bit more appropriate for the time of year that we actually use this, this space. The first year that we had the cottage put together, we actually had a lock on the door to the kitchen. It was serving as just a glorified space for storage. And after last summer, we sort of realized, wait a second, it probably makes sense to open up that space. And so we called the plumber, had them reattach the original sink. There were some great-granddaughters who visited in May of this year, who came, were walking around past our place about 1,000 times, and finally they admitted that their great-grandparents had owned this place, and that it had been in the family since the 1920s. So arguably, they could have been the ones that actually built it. And when we brought them inside and showed them around the cottage, they commented that the sink was still the same, and that there was a potbelly stove that used to be over here in the corner. There were a lot of neat elements that they were able to kind of highlight for us, and they also laughed about the condoms that the story that we shared, and I even think one of the great-granddaughters ended up blushing when she imagined her great-grandfather and grandmother together with one another. So with the kitchen finished earlier this spring, and we did things like put a replica old style refrigerator. Made sure that we were careful of the space, in terms of not putting too much furniture in there, but instead, a breakfast bar that sits against the wall. The picture of the cottage and what it was supposed to be finally had materialized, and again, every step of the way it became clearer and clearer as to what this ultimately should be. When we have family and friends that come, there's a leather bounded guest journal. And inside of it, on the first page, is a request that anybody who stays here goes ahead and adds their story of the time that they stayed with us on Mack Creek at Cayuga Lake. I didn't mention that we had put a roof on last fall. That was a little bit of a fiasco. But what was clear probably by the time that we actually got the roof on the cottage, and a roof, that kind of an investment is one that, just like when the prior owners worked on the foundation, we had kind of realized, like, this isn't about us. This is about making sure that a cottage that was built in the 1920s, stands for as long as we're here, and hopefully when we pass on this property to our kids, we'll be here for many years past them as well. Like we've done that job. We've done pretty much everything that we can do. We're probably going to do some painting, in the porch area, just to give it a little bit of a finished look. So these are my kids, Alice and Graham. One of the things that I think is important to note about this place and our sense of stewardship for it is that Elm Beach Road or what is commonly known in this area as Elm Beach. The first mention of it in recorded newspaper history in the county was in August of 1890, when an Ethel Meyer came camping here. And what's interesting about that is that, you know, for the next probably 100 years at least, what Elm Beach really was known for was just hunting and fishing camps. And in fact, if we look up and down this road, Elm Beach, a lot of the cottages that now stand are, you know, I think probably expansions of those small fishing and hunting camps that once were. If we strip back the layers of this place, you could definitely see that, you know, basic, no insulation, you know, kind of roughing it. And if we just, you know, drive a minute south from here, you'll see just camps that probably were just as they were 100 years ago as well. From, you know, from that perspective, the houses that are going up and the sense of vacation, I don't get a sense that you know, was something that existed here. Not in those days. People worked, and you know, maybe they came for some leisure activities, but that, you know, was mostly around, you know, the sense of camping, a sense of you know, a sense of fishing, a sense of hunting, and those days are almost gone. But I feel like, you know, this place represents a kind of relic, an easier, a simpler time when the wants of those that came before us were fewer, and the sense of what was actually needed to enjoy one's leisure time was you know, was much less. As a personal admission, you know, for me, working on this cottage was very much just my COVID project. I think everyone, whether they realize it or not, had some version of that. And you know, there were points at which decisions were being made about what to do inside that I just kept to myself. Mary Jane and I are not like that as a married couple. We tend to, you know, talk about most things and decide together. And there was a point at which she, you know, kind of paused me and said, "Hey, wait a second. You know, you're doing this on your own. What about us?" And that's true. This was, if you look at the interior of the cottage, very much, you know, my COVID project. That said, when it comes to the exterior, I think it's important to note the green thumb that exists inherently in Mary Jane, the work that she does to keep, you know, all our grounds beautiful, but in particular, there have been numerous, almost unequivocally, neighbors and strangers, quite frankly, who pass by our house, and in particular this cottage, and comment on, you know, what a bright and cheerful space it is.